Satyajit Ray, I'm pronouncing his name in the Bengali way, was born in a Brahmo family, and he grew up in Calcutta and in Shantiniketan, where he was educated. That is, he was a student at a university founded by Rabindranath Tagore. So he certainly was a sharer in the last remnants, one might say, of what is called a Renaissance Bengali culture of the 19th century, while Satyajit himself was, of course, very much a product of the 20th century. Satyajit is a much more cosmopolitan figure. He is influenced by European film. So there is a continuity, but there's also a break.
He was one of the pioneers of film society in India. He and his friends founded in 1947, the year of Indian independence, the first proper film society called the Calcutta Film Society, which still exists in some form. So if you look at his writings from those days, and also later when he became a filmmaker, you'll see that there's an attempt to argue that cinema should be taken seriously as an art form. But one had to still struggle, someone like Ray, to sometimes prove that cinema was an independent art form, not dependent on something like literature or theatre. That continued for some time.
Charulata is the name that Ray gave to the film that he made in 1964. It is based on a Tagore novella, which is called Noshto Neer, and that was published in 1901. Rabindranath Tagore was the greatest literary figure of modern India. He is not just, I think, an important figure for Bengalis. He is an important figure like Gandhi, like Nehru, because of the way in which they accomplish a very, very difficult transition into modernity and face up to the reality of India's encounter with the Western world. And I think particularly because his life bridges the 19th and 20th centuries, his genius is at once extraordinarily grounded, local, Indian. At the same time, he was able to express a kind of a profound idealistic universalism, which is very, very exceptional. I don't find it in any other writer of this period. Noshto Neer is usually translated as the broken nest because one speaks of a broken marriage. And particularly, I think that Rabindranath Tagore at this time becomes concerned with what he himself called the harsh touch of domesticity. He is looking at the household and domesticity and attempting to explore what he saw as a set of very, very difficult relationships, triangular relationships within the household. Ray was an extraordinarily attentive and brilliantly inspired reader of Tagore. I have rarely read any criticism or analysis of Tagore that goes to the heart of the writing, the heart of the matter itself, in the way that Ray's films do, despite the fact that Ray is never interested in simple adaptation. He is never really just translating the novel to the screen. But he seems to be reading the work for what it can tell him in a way that is quite exceptional.
Charulata, interestingly, is a film that is obsessed with the written word. And from the very first moment, you see the written word, the alphabet, taking over in some sense. So it begins with this letter B that Charu, the protagonist, is embroidering. It's a handkerchief that she's sort of making for her husband, because his name is Bhupati, which is spelt with B. But it's also a signal to the preponderance of the written word in the film throughout. So that very soon you will find Charu starting, sort of looking for a novel to read. She hums the name of the most important novelist of 19th century in India, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee. She sort of hums the name of the novelist, Bankim, Bankim.
Bankim, Bankim.
Ray's Charulata contains a number of references to Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay. He is the greatest of 19th century Bengali novelists. It is Bankim with his early novels who sets the frame really for the reception of the novel form, the novel genre into Indian literature.
Bankim.
But then she picks out one of Bankim's very celebrated novels from 1865 actually, Kopal Kundala. And this is a novel about a girl brought up in a wilderness by a hermit who then is married to a young man in a conventional family, and it is impossible to domesticate her. She cannot adjust to the life of the household, and finally she escapes from this marriage, goes away into the forest and finally dies. The fact that Charu, imprisoned in her lonely marriage, is picking up this book and perhaps starting to read it suggests an imagination completely pervaded with Bankim's heroines and Bankim's stories, in a way that I think Ray makes a deliberate constituent of Charu's personality.
And actually from that point on, you are tuned into the fact that Bankim himself, literature itself, novels, all of these will constantly come as motifs, and also handwriting, writing, the printed word, constantly appear in the film.
There is the camera itself focusing on the written word, upon the title Kopal Kundala, upon the letter B, upon other instances of the life of script. And it is using all of this in order to suggest that the script itself is an object which can be viewed just as we view the objects out there on the cinema screen.
Jai Dada!
What is interesting to me in the case of Charulata is that in many cases you have metaphors of space, you have impossible dreams, hopes, ambitions. For example, there is that elaborate discussion in the novella about the garden. At the start of the novella, Amol and Charu plan the laying out of a beautiful garden which will be a place of solace and leisure.
এখান দিয়ে একটা খাল যাবে, তাতে কিছু পদ্ম আর কিছু হাঁস, তার উপর একটা শাঁখো।
There are references to this garden design, but it is by no means as important to the film. Rather, there is a wonderful use of the relatively unreclaimed garden, the wilderness, where Charu sits on a swing and Amol reads out to her or converses with her or even sings to her. And the garden then becomes a space where Charu has her first inklings of what she might write about. She has those scenes that pass through her mind, and she then goes and puts them into the form of a written essay. At the same time, however, Tagore's text doesn't actually contain any very elaborate description of any interior. It speaks of interior space as a metaphorical space, as a symbolic space. He speaks of recesses, tunnels, enclosed spaces, imprisonment. And what Ray is doing here is translating metaphor and symbol into a kind of visual tracking of affect. So that in the beginning of the film, you have Charu working at her embroidery in the bedroom, then coming out of the inner rooms of the house, reaching the outer rooms, and she enters this library cum sitting room where she looks for a book. And then her attention is caught by sounds from a region that is even further outside, and she looks through the window. Then, once that external set of scenes has passed, she returns to the room. She just idly wanders about the room and picks up objects and fingers little ornaments on the table. As that scene unfolds, it appears that Charu is one of the beautiful objects owned by Bhupati, part of the furniture, part of the domestic furniture of his household, somebody whom he values, but he doesn't really understand or care for. It is not a matter that can be articulated through verbal expression. It is entirely a property of the camera. And I think that that is an extraordinarily brilliant way not only of reading Tagore's novel, but claiming an identity for the film as a medium, which is completely different from that of the novelist, however great a novelist he is.
Tagore composed more than 2,000 songs. There's a cluster within it which assimilates a lot of Western elements. He does that very freely. So it draws from all traditions. And today it has chosen those kind of songs. Tagore's song called Mamochitte Niti Nritte Keje Nache, you hear that from the very opening sequence. There's another Tagore song called Phule Phule Dhole Dhole, which is partly sung. And Charu sort of hums it in the garden sequence. And there is another song that Amal sits at the piano and sings fully with musical accompaniment. It's called Ami Chini Go Chini Tomare. I know you, oh foreign woman.
দেখেছি মাধবী রাতে তোমায় দেখেছি হৃদি মাঝারে তোমায় দেখেছি হৃদি মাঝারে.
And if you think of that perspective, looking back at, let's say, late 19th century, early 20th century, whatever, vaguely, that period, you cannot have a world without Tagore for a Bengali audience.
আমি চিনি গো চিনি তোমারে ও বউ ঠাকুরানী.
দেখি একটা কপি. 24th issue of the Sentinel, dated April the 9th, 1879.
The film is set in 1879. That date appears on the masthead of an issue of Bhupati's newspaper.
But the story, if you read the original story, it looks like it is set sometime in the late 19th century. Ray decided to have a more specific kind of time for the setting of the story.
You also have Ray, not Tagore, but Ray, bringing in a reference to a Bankim essay called Prachina o Nobina, which means the old or the traditional woman and the new woman.
তুমি প্রাচীনা না নবীনা?
খেলবি কিনা তাই বলো, নাহলে তুলে রেখে দেবো। কাল চিনির বিবি লুকিয়ে ছিল বালিশের তলায়।
And Amol humorously contrasts the relatively uneducated Mondakini, Charu's sister-in-law, to Charu, suggesting that Charu is the new woman and Monda is the old woman or the traditional woman.
করিলেন না প্রাচীনের কাণ্ড দেখো বঙ্কিমের কথা উঠতেই ভ্রমরের গুঞ্জন আরম্ভ হয়ে গেল
And the purpose of all this elaborate discussion is to create the form of a new woman in Charulata who will both be properly attentive to her household and her husband and all her domestic tasks, as well as being an educated woman who can give companionship to her husband, who can be the ideal partner of a companionate marriage. And this certainly was the purpose of education for women in the 19th century. Charulata is a film that is about a woman, the inner world of the household, domesticity, and the external world, which appears to be accessible and negotiable only by men.
তার আগে আমি একটা কথা বলবো লিবারেলসরা জিতেছে বলে আজ আমরা এখানে আমোদ করছি এবং ভারতবর্ষের আজকের রাজনৈতিক অবস্থায় সেটা করা আমাদের একান্ত কর্তব্য
It's very interesting that if you look at the formation of the Indian subject, colonial subject, in late 19th century, you have to look at a structure of inside-outside. Tagore himself gave a very felicitous title to his novel in 1909, later novel, The Home and the World, he called it. It's a brilliant kind of summation of the whole problem. And also, mapped onto the home and the world, the inside-outside, is the male-female domain. Mapped onto that is a kind of culture and politics separation. Mapped onto that is a different registers of language. So Amal and Charu are meant to share their private literary sort of world. The moment Amal publishes his writings outside, Charu is completely devastated.
সরল আমার লেখা নিয়েছে সরল
সত্যি
এই দেখো চিঠি
আমি বলেছিলাম
You tend to sort of wonder what happened. Why is it so shocking? It's shocking because a protocol is broken. It's insight. Amal goes public with the writing. Bhupati from the very beginning says that he has no business with literature. Literature belongs to the inner quarters. He is a man of politics.
দাদা তোমার সরল আছে
আসে তো সবই তবে ওখানে নেই থাকলেই পাশের ঘরের বুক কেচে থাকতে পারে তোমার বউঠান তো সবসময় ওখানেই ঘুরঘুর করেন
তোমার বুঝি এভাবে
আমি হয় ওর রসে বঞ্চিত
And it tells several people, including Amal, that that's your domain. That's Charu's domain. And you try to keep her company. She's very lonely. And remember, when they try to patch up, they try for a reconciliation. After Amal has left, they go to this seaside. And Bhupati is planning to bring out a new publication. They said, let's not waste time. Let's go back to Calcutta. Charu says, your magazine should have not only politics, but also poetry and other things. Bhupati is doubtful. Then she says it very clearly. Politics in English, poetry and literature in Bangla, in the same magazine, in Bengali. So even that distinction is made clear here.
দুরকমই থাকবে ইংরেজিতে রাজনীতি বাংলায় অন্য সব একটা তুমি দেখবে আর একটা আমি
It is at the heart of a colonial and post-colonial politics of language. What language do you use? How do you speak to the oppressor, to the ruler, without abandoning your own native human identity? And you must think of Ray himself as joining in that debate because he didn't make films in English. He made films in Bengali and he became an internationally acclaimed filmmaker by making films in Bengali. He never seemed to have thought of choosing to make a film in the English language in order to reach a global audience. He knew that it wasn't necessary.
Ray knew very well that he was walking along a rather risky path when he started adapting these classics of Bengali literature, because you tend to outrage people if you take liberty with the original text. And Charulata did that in good measure, in the sense that if you read the contemporary reviews, there was a number of people who thought that he was taking undue liberty with someone like Tagore. For example, there are 20 chapters. These chapters are very small. It's a novella in the original story. You have done away with the last 7 altogether. Right? Why call it an adaptation? It could be your story. Ray took the trouble of writing a really longish answer to this. It's one of his longest pieces, actually. He says, this is the problem with our critics, that they don't know how to watch films cinematically. They look for the original story, now somewhat kind of dramatized before them with performers and some set. And he explained why cinematic communication cannot be entirely verbal. It has to be primarily visual. The ending in the original story, Bhupati, the husband, decides to go away to Mysore in the south. Charu first says, "May I come with you?" When he hesitates and says, "Yes, maybe," Charu says, "Let it be." That's where the novel ends. Ray says, just try doing that on the screen. It won't look convincing at all. And it is not a proper ending. He was apparently influenced by Truffaut's 400 Blows, the last freeze. So he used that. There's no Mysore. Bhupati comes back. The 2 hands freeze there. So all of that, he thought he had to explain to a larger audience.
To me, Charulata is his most perfect film. It is the most attentive to the ways in which the language of the camera can interpret and reuse the verbal or the written text. And at the end of the film, you have on the screen itself the name of the novel, Noshtonir. Is this homage to Tagore, or is it yet another reminder that for the filmmaker, the novel, the written text is also an object for the camera's eye?